have with us Chip Childers. So, Chip, first of all, how does it feel, being in Boston?
Boston's a great city. Great city. I love it. I'm an East Coaster, so I like the fact that we're having the event here on the East Coast. We typically, our North American events have in the past, they've been on the West Coast. And certainly there's a lot of draw for all the organizations that have development teams there. But Cloud Foundry is being used in a lot of the very large multinational companies, and many of them have a big presence, on the East Coast, New York, Boston, surrounding areas. So we wanted to move it, shake it up a little bit,
Right.
Make sure that we can go a little bit closer to where the primary users are.
Right. Yeah, I am also from East Coast, DC, so it becomes very, very, far for me to go all the way 8 hours flight to go to any West Coast event. So it's just, and I think AWS, they are also doing an event in DC, so I can just, take a
It's great. It's great.
Awesome. So what's new in this? I saw
all kinds of new things. I mean, this is our summit, so we have some news. A lot of our members have some news. So the theme of the event is called Running at Scale. And yeah, there's a little bit of a pun there because here we are,
right,
a couple days after the Boston Marathon.
Right.
But I think what's more interesting about it is for the Cloud Foundry community specifically, and we released some data on our user survey.
Right.
So we've run a user survey twice now. And what we've seen and what we believe to be true, but we've actually now seen through data, is that the adoption of Cloud Foundry is continuing to adopt kind of more broadly across more industry, across more organizations. But what's most important is how deep it's becoming within the companies that have chosen to use it. So for example, we've seen a 21-point swing from the last survey to this survey, so less than a year, in the number of organizations that replied and said, yeah, we have more than 50 developers. Now, if we start slicing that, we're going to see that range, of course, is anything from 51 to thousands of developers. So we're really reaching a point with the Cloud Foundry technology and family of technologies where it's being used in deeper and deeper way within organizations. It's becoming much more important to them. More applications are being built on top of it. The businesses are getting to the point where they fundamentally drive their entire business through the apps that run on top of CF.
But what is driving this adoption? Or
Sure, I think what's driving the adoption is really simple. Our community is highly focused on making sure that there are two key people that are cared for with the software. So the first is the developer experience. That's what Cloud Foundry started on.
Right.
That's what it is continued to focus on. And since its inception, Cloud Foundry had an opinion about how developers can be productive, right? What are the right constraints that free them to actually be creative about the business? We've iterated on that successfully for years now. It's a very fast-moving project. It releases on average of twice a month. Right. And because of that ability to iterate, just like our users want to do within their own organization, we're very responsive, and we've been refining that developer experience year over year, release over release. So that's really our focus. The second one, though, is the operator experience. Right? Because what we're really happy to see is that while there are thousands of developers that are developing on top of the CF platform and within a single company, generally that platform can be operated by a handful of people. We consistently see ratios of one operator supporting 4,000 to 5,000 applications because the platform does so much on their behalf.
Right. I was going through some of the announcements.
Sure.
One was the focus on Asia. A few weeks ago, CNCF, the Cloud Native, your sister concern, they also released a survey around Asia, and there's a massive adoption.
There is.
What's going on with the Cloud Foundry in Asia?
So Cloud Foundry has actually been adopted in Asia for quite a while. Japan was one of the first markets that really grabbed it. You see that with Fujitsu, NTT Communications, and Yahoo Japan is another very large Cloud Foundry user. But I just got back from Beijing. Spent some time there with Alibaba, with Baidu. These organizations are, as well as a number of just enterprise companies. I had the privilege of speaking at a banking forum. Generally, I would say that most folks in China would say, look, there's two things. One, the consumer adoption of technology has skyrocketed. Right? So you're there in Beijing. Nobody's paying with a card, nobody's paying with cash. It's all mobile payment, right? So Alipay or the Wemo Pay. The second thing, though, is that the traditional enterprise there has not started the digital transformation journey quite as actively as we have seen. First, I think it was in North America, and then we started to move into Europe. China is at the point now where it is absolutely raring to go through the digitization process. That's, if you read the newspapers, the China Daily, when you're there, half the articles are about the digitization process. We call it digital transformation here.
Right.
So they're very interested in that. The other thing is that there's a very broad and active process of adopting and embracing open source technologies.
Oh, yes.
That's happening in China, right? So you see it with the OpenStack Foundation, CNCF, of course, is seeing it as well. We're seeing it. So I think it's the culmination of those two things. And Cloud Foundry sits at the nexus of digital transformation and open source. And so it's a wonderful place with a lot of really exciting opportunity for our community, for the community that's growing there. And we're super excited to actually have Alibaba join as a gold member.
Right. Is it just consumption, or they're also kind of active contributors?
So they're early on in the contribution process. Alibaba is an active contributor. They took responsibility, as most of the cloud providers do, to create what's called the CPI, or the Cloud Provider Interface, that our Bosch layer uses to work with IaaS or vSphere or OpenStack environments. So they took responsibility to build the Ali Cloud version of that, and that was recently merged into the upstream project, so now they're actively maintaining it. They're committers on that project. That's kind of step one. I think that I spent time with Baidu specifically. Amazingly bright engineering platform team there. They have a lot of really great ideas. They're a Cloud Foundry user, but they're a Cloud Foundry user from years ago. Back when it was at VMware before Pivotal. They started using it then, and they've kind of forked, and they did some things that were specific to their organization. But I really expect that the community in China is going to find the right way to participate. I tend to think about community participation as a series of steps up a ladder, right? And so if you start as a user, what can you do? What's the first step you can do to give back? Give feedback on new features, propose new things. So I'm excited to see them take that first step if they haven't already gone further up the ladder.
Like in Chinese market, it's called BAT, right? Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent. Tencent is the WeChat. So is Tencent also in some capacity using Cloud Foundry or not yet?
At this point, I'm not sure.
When you are engaging with Alibaba and Baidu, do you see any friction when it comes to language barrier, and do you want to lower that barrier somehow?
We do want to lower the barrier. That's one of a couple of different barriers that make it difficult. We're in the English-speaking world. We're sort of, I would say, spoiled by the fact that it tends to be the language of international business, right? So I can travel throughout Europe, and generally, everyone speaks English. That is very different in China. That is very different in Japan. And it is very different in Korea, as just kind of three example markets. We need to find ways to make sure that someone who is maybe early in their learning of English, or maybe doesn't speak English at all, we still need to find ways to embrace them. We're on a journey to figure this out. We're working pretty hard with a team that we've got that's actually in China. Their job is to help us understand collectively what can we do to support the development of the community. How can we take some of the learning that's happened here in North America? Our users here are amazing, as they are in Europe. They share with each other, even if they're competitors, how they're going about reorganizing their companies. They have a lot of learnings. I'd love to be able to find a way to make that available to someone who doesn't speak English or read English. And so we're going to do a number of things to try to do that.
And it's both ways, because different cultures, they solve problems differently. So you learn so much from each other. The third point is, what kind of consumption is there in the government sector or public sector?
Well, you saw that Cloud.gov, which is a service that's provided here in the United States by a group called 18F. 18F is an office inside the General Services Administration. It's government, right? Lots of layers inside of this, inside of that. Cloud.gov is amazing. It is a group at 18F that chose Cloud Foundry and said, we're trying to help agencies reinvent citizen engagement with the government. Large companies have figured this out. Internet startups have figured this out. Government should too, right? Couple that with a drive towards open data and more transparent data access, you have a real opportunity to change, the way that we interact with our government. So they chose Cloud Foundry. They have a few other services that they pull together, and they have a reference stack that they can use when 18F goes to consult with the FEC or with Commerce or Interior or any of the different departments and agencies that they're working with. So that's really interesting. The second thing that I'd point out about government in general is not US centric. So the same story has occurred in the UK, as well as Australia, as well as we're seeing adoption in South Korea with the NIA standardizing on CF. And you also have a lot of projects happening in Canada as well as in the Netherlands, just as some examples. What's really inspiring to me is the collaboration across these various digital transformation offices in different countries. They've taken it upon themselves to cross-pollinate, to communicate, to share how they're using Cloud Foundry, how they fit into certain compliance frameworks, which doesn't matter what language you use, the controls are very likely to be the same list, right? So they share an enormous amount between each other, their best practices, and that's really cool to see. That's really cool to see.
Yeah, that's cross-pollination, and that's the beauty of open source, basically. So when there's so many different segments from industry or society are using Cloud Foundry, how do you ensure that within the ecosystem there is kind of no interoperability challenge? Because there are different vendors they offer. You work with SUSE, you work with a lot of different companies. How do you ensure that?
Yeah, that's a great question. We're actually very purposeful as a community about the idea of what is Cloud Foundry, and at its very basic. In a very basic sense, it's about the developer experience. And what's important, most of all, is consistency of that experience across the different providers. They're all going to add value. They're going to differentiate in interesting ways. IBM has Watson services. SUSE packages it a different way. Everyone has a slightly different spin. But as a software developer who works in a large company or works at a startup, I want the same CF push experience across all of these vendors. So we have our certification program, platform certification program, that was launched back in 2015, late 2015, with the explicit goal of saying, while there are other ways that people are allowed to use Cloud Foundry, it's permissively licensed. Let's as a group, as a ecosystem, agree that consistency is very important. And second, that since we're actually evolving the platform together, let's make sure everybody stays along for the ride. So as a developer, if you're using a certified Cloud Foundry distribution, it is recent, it is consistent across the others, and it will generally work the same way. So your skills as an individual developer become portable across the companies, regardless of the vendor they choose to work with.
In addition to certification, do you also do any kind of programs for developers themselves? So they're like certified Cloud Foundry developers or any other?
We do, yeah, absolutely. So last year in June, we launched a series of things. So we've always done little training sessions here at the summits, but in June last year at the summit in Santa Clara, we launched a training and professional certification suite of services that we offer. We're actually really happy about this. We've had over 15,000 people go through the programs. It's been a great success. We're continuing to add more training partners. Some of the vendors are actually reworking their entire training and certification programs to say, here's the common baseline that we can reuse, because we offer it to them as something that they can use as a stepping stone. They differentiate, and they actually get to focus on training that's specific to their product lines. So we're really happy about that success. And again, to date, we've touched, in less than a year, 15,000 people.
And you also mentioned that the ecosystem is keeping up with the evolution of Cloud Foundry.
Yeah.
Cloud Foundry predates container, Docker and containers, all those things.
It was using the Linux kernel features that we call containers today,
Right.
before Docker was a company.
Right, but nowadays new terms are popping up, and our industry loves to coin new terms like serverless or function. So, what is Cloud Foundry doing in that space?
Yeah, so at that point, right now we're letting the distributions, or they all have different opinions.
Right.
So IBM's focused on Apache OpenWhisk.
Right.
Pivotal has Riff. So if they have a need in their customer base or their user base, they are absolutely solving for that need as part of the more cohesive stack. So what is Cloud Foundry's relationship with that? So first, it's premature to say, hey, as a whole ecosystem, we should consolidate. It's just not there. We're kind of exploring it. The second thing, though, is that what's super important for a developer is making sure that you can sew things together. And the Open Service Broker API effort continues to be successful. More and more platforms are adopting it. And specifically, if you look at IBM, if you look at Pivotal, you can see it's core to the way they think about new interfaces that developers can work with and how those interfaces relate to any backing service that they want to provide, database, message queue, et cetera. So the Open Service Broker API is kind of the key to that evolution.
Right. One more announcement that I see there's the Foundry.
Yeah.
What is that?
So the Foundry is a way to help end users, regardless of the vendor that they're working with, understand the scope of capabilities that are out there around Cloud Foundry services. Systems integrators, plugins, infrastructure providers that work well with Cloud Foundry. And so think of it as an online marketplace.
Okay.
It lets you understand that this system integrator works with these two distributions. This second systems integrator might work with those two plus a different. So the idea is to try to bring together the scale of the ecosystem. We're still in a collection process because the CF ecosystem's so large. There's so much activity happening around it. When we launched this, we started with, I think it was 700. Now we're into the thousands. And really, it's just about helping to inventory all of the different capabilities that you can take advantage of with CF at the core.
Is it just kind of a catalog and listing of all the different partners?
Yeah,
or
that's
is it
exactly
more than
right.
that?
Well, it's designed as a catalog that lets you look up, find, and then you go get more information. So for example, if you want a systems integrator that works with SAP Cloud Platform, that's something that you can go find there. If you want a systems integrator that works with both SAP Cloud Platform and Pivotal Cloud Foundry, and I'm just using some examples,
right, you
could find them as well. So I was just speaking with someone in a very large retail company last night, and she realized, wait a minute, I actually have Cloud Foundry services from two different vendors because these different vendors are solving different problems.
Right.
But when she realized that, now she says, well, actually, I can be much more flexible with where I put developers.
Right.
Right? They can work on systems over here, and then if they need to work on something that's going to live in a different environment, they can move over.
And is there any way to help either the partners or the customers that they can also find the right match also in a way?
Yeah, it's the start of that. That's kind of where we're going with this.
As you gave example, somebody was using two different providers.
Yeah.
But they can find a better mix or match of.
That's one of the things.
Matchmaking dating sites.
Yeah, it's a dating site for services and capabilities tied to Cloud Foundry at the center.
Right. When you look at future, you have been here for so long. What are the big challenges that you see? IoT is becoming a big use case. Machine learning is coming in. So what are the either potentials or challenges?
Yeah, so I'd answer that in maybe two ways. Depends which question you're asking. So Cloud Foundry as a community, of course, has its kind of next efforts that we're focused on. There are some macro industry trends that relate to us as well. So on the Cloud Foundry side, for us, right now, the next wave of opportunity is around how do we continue to work with the end users, the customers of our vendors and the direct users of open source to continue down the path of interoperability and integration, right? So one of the things that we know for a fact is that the PaaS experience, the just hand to platform code, and the container management experience are both incredibly important. all of these enterprises want both, and they want them to work really well together. So our technical community is running a number of different projects to try to sew these experiences together so they're much more cohesive. And again, using the history of the developer-centric focus that we have. Right, so we're engaging heavily with the rest of the Kubernetes ecosystem, Istio, Envoy is already well integrated. It also lets us take advantage of the innovation that's happening all throughout the open source world, right? We don't create everything that's in the CF architecture. Oftentimes we create what's necessary if nothing else exists, and then happily adopt new technologies that have formed new communities that have built something that's interesting.
Right. Yeah, you had Bosch, and then you adopted, Kubernetes, which came. So
well, it's not an either or,
and then you
actually.
mix it and you Kubo, and then CNC.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Right. It's the power of and,
right,
not the power of or.
And the second is that through the industry, what kind of trends you're seeing, and then when you said that, who decides, that okay, this is what we should focus on.
Sure. Well, the community decides what they're going to focus on. If I look at some things like macro trends, I'd say that we have a real need to ensure that IoT devices are going to be much more secure. Now, Cloud Foundry doesn't directly relate to edge computing right now, but that might be a place that we have some opinions, right? We have a very strong track record as a community of thinking about operability. Some of the velocity that's achieved in kind of cloud application that can be achieved when you build applications in the cloud using Cloud Foundry or similar technology, that may be appropriate for edge devices as well. And so that's an area that we can look at. But just as important actually is the patching, right? So one of the strengths of Cloud Foundry is, for example, Heartbleed is a great example of this, right? You remember OpenSSL's Heartbleed? Critical vulnerability. Our community had the necessary patches released within, I think it was less than a day of Heartbleed being announced. And that propagated through the whole ecosystem. Now, on an individual platform that's running individual Cloud Foundry installation, it is remarkably easy to patch the entire estate, right? So an operator just says, it's time to roll a new version of the stem cell or a new version of the rootfs. And the whole process can happen basically hands-off, and the developers don't need to know about it. That's the type of thinking around operations and then enabling the separation of concerns that might apply to the edge. We'll see where we go.
Yeah, that has been a big challenge, in the Linux world also, that you have the patches, but nobody's pushing those patches. Nobody's applying those patches.
That's right.
Anyway, thanks again for your time, and I appreciate it.